I was in 6th grade. Small, really poor school in California. That morning, we had a lockdown drill. Super common and recognizable at this school. All the teachers would warn us ahead of time to save the panic. A short buzzer would go off, and then our principal would go on the intercom and give this huge spiel about how this was a lockdown drill. That when a real lockdown came by, the buzzer would play for longer, and she wouldn't do any announcements. We all shut the curtains and sat in the classroom. It was over before we knew it, and the day went by. But as the day progresses, this picture kept popping up. From the glances I got, it was a picture of some notebook paper. I assumed it was something personal somebody lost, and everybody was just being dicks and showing it around, so I didn't even ask to see it. Finally, it was the second to last period of the day. I ducked out of the class to use the restroom. But while I was at the sink, the buzzer went off again. It was so long I wanted to cover my ears. No announcements, no explanation. A real lockdown. You're supposed to stay where you are. In my case, hop on top of a toilet and lock my stall. But I was not about to sit here and wait for whatever intruder could be here to barge into the bathroom while they contemplated or recouped. Screw that. I ran out of the bathroom, hoping to go back to my classroom, but it was locked, and there was no way my teacher was letting me back in. I was panicking, so I kept going down the hall, trying each and every handle I could. Finally, I found this other girl sobbing as she kept trying to open the same handle, I assume her natural class. I grabbed her hand and led her down my path as I kept trying doors. After only a minute, though it felt like hours, we found an empty computer lab whose door was open. We went inside and hid until the entire thing was over. The school tried to keep it hush-hush, but we all eventually found out a kid brought his dad's gun to school because he was mad, but then realized he didn't want to hurt anybody. He hid in the bathrooms and called the police on himself. I think the scariest part was the picture I was talking about earlier. I found out, after everybody figured out what happened, that it was his list. I was number 9. Back in 2009, I was a high school student at a relatively small school in the suburbs. The campus was nestled in a quiet neighborhood, and the idea of a school lockdown was something none of us had ever seriously considered. It was just another ordinary day, or so we thought. It was mid-morning when the intercom crackled to life, and our principal's voice came through.
Lockdown, lockdown. This is an emergency alert. Please follow lockdown procedures. Go into the nearest room or building, lock the door, and turn off all lights.
The initial confusion in the classroom quickly gave way to a tense hush as our teacher, Mrs. Johnson, moved to lock the door and draw the blinds. None of us knew what was happening, but the seriousness in our teacher's eyes sent a chill down our spines. We huddled in silence, the only sound being the muffled whispers and worried glances exchanged among us. The minutes dragged on, and it felt like an eternity. The school intercom remained eerily silent, leaving us in the dark about the nature of the threat. Some students tried to check their phones discreetly, but the lack of information persisted. Mrs. Johnson, a seasoned teacher with a calm demeanor, tried her best to keep us calm. Outside our classroom, we could hear faint sirens approaching. The anxiety in the room intensified as we realized that this was more than just a drill. The sirens grew louder, and the distant sound of police radios added to the tension. Suddenly, a loud bang echoed through the hallway, and our hearts collectively skipped a beat. It was followed by the unmistakable sound of footsteps, heavy and deliberate. Mrs. Johnson motioned for us to stay silent, and we clung to each other, our breaths shallow and rapid. The footsteps grew closer, and panic threatened to overtake us. In the dimly lit classroom, the seconds stretched into minutes as we listened to the intruder moving through the hallway. It felt like we were living a nightmare, trapped in our own little world of fear and uncertainty. Just when it seemed like we couldn't bear the suspense any longer, the intercom crackled back to life. It was the voice of the principal, her voice trembling as she informed us that the police were on the scene and that the threat had been neutralized. Relief washed over us like a tidal wave, and tears of fear turned into tears of gratitude. The lockdown was eventually lifted, and we were reunited with our anxious parents outside the school gates. It turned out that a troubled individual had entered the school premises with a weapon, but the quick response of law enforcement had prevented a tragedy. It was a bone-chilling winter's day in 2017 when the horrors of a school lockdown unfolded before my eyes. I found myself trapped in the dimly lit bathroom stall, the scent of disinfectant lingering in the air as an ominous reminder of the everyday routines that had been shattered. The intercom crackled to life, and the principal's strained voice pierced the silence, urging all students and staff to seek immediate shelter. Panic surged through me as I realized that the casual refuge of the bathroom had become my makeshift sanctuary. I huddled on the cold tile floor, my breath visible in the frigid air, clutching my phone like a lifeline. The only sounds were the distant echoes of sirens and the muffled cries of frightened students. Suddenly, the tranquility of the bathroom was shattered by a series of deafening crashes. My heart pounded in my chest as if it were trying to escape the impending horror. It felt as if the world had plunged into darkness, and the only illumination came from the flickering fluorescent lights above. The chilling echoes of relentless pounding reverberated through the restroom, each blow sending shockwaves of fear through my veins. Someone was outside, desperately trying to break into the stalls. Panic set in as I realized the threat was right on the other side of my flimsy stall door. In the dim light, I saw the shadowy figure of a man moving erratically. His erratic mutterings and deranged laughter made my skin crawl. I clamped a hand over my mouth, stifling my breath as I tried to make myself as small and silent as possible. The man's voice grew louder and more unhinged with each passing second. He began rattling the latch on my stall, his fingers clawing at the door. I could see his silhouette contorting in twisted frustration as he attempted to force his way in. Terror gripped me, and my mind raced to find a way out of this nightmarish scenario. I fumbled for my phone, fingers trembling as I dialed 911, silently praying for help. The operator's voice was a distant lifeline as I whispered my location and the dire circumstances. As I clung to that fragile connection, the intruder's relentless assault on the stall door continued. My world had shrunk to the confines of that tiny space, the walls closing in around me. Suddenly, the bathroom was bathed in the harsh glare of police flashlights. Commands to drop his weapon filled the air, and the pounding ceased. Relief washed over me as I heard the man being apprehended and handcuffed, his frenzied protests echoing down the hall. The lockdown was eventually lifted, and I emerged from the bathroom, shaken but safe. It was later revealed that the intruder had no affiliation with the school, but his motives remained shrouded in madness.